Everything seemingly went right for growing soybeans this year, which is why it's all going wrong now. Soybean futures are near 4-year lows, down about 45% from its 2022 peak. Corn's also in a similar boat. We are in the midst of an American farm slump right now, despite very high yields for the country's two biggest crops. Earlier this year, the U.S. Department of Ag projected net farm income would drop 26% in 2024, affecting not only the farmer, but the businesses that rely on the farmer's income, like John Deere and Kinsey. Deere expects its North America sales to continue to slump. This summer, the company has laid off hundreds of salaried employees. I want to bring in Damian Mason, host of the Business of Agriculture podcast. Damian, why do we have such high soybean yields this year? What's going on specifically?
Well, first off, farmers in America are very, very good at doing what they do, which is produce commodities. We're remarkable at it. On a trend line, now granted, there's been some down years, but on a trend line, every year, our soybean production goes up about a bushel per acre. Okay, 0.8 to 1 bushel per acre. And if you put that over time, it's kind of like the old thing. Remember that that little mathematical thing they did when you were young? If I gave you a penny today, but I doubled it every day for the next month, would you take that deal or $20 every day? And you say, oh, $20 every day, not realizing there's like that same thing about exponential growth. It's just remarkable. So we're going to put out about 53 bushels per acre. Say when I was in high school, we were at half that. Okay. So 53 bushels per acre put on 86 million acres means a whole heck of a lot of soybeans. We're going to be around 4.6 billion bushels of soybeans produced in the United States of America this year. Favorable weather patterns, technological advances, the machinery is so good. You mentioned John Deere, the ability for us to get the right seeding population, to get it at the right soil planted depth, to use the right fertility at the right time. It's just amazing compared to where we were just a long time ago. And as an agricultural person, a farm boy, I always point out, remember, environmentally, we're doing this with less units of natural resources per bushel produced than we ever have. So we're just really good at making bushels. The problem, of course, is we don't need all these bushels. I mean, it's just a situation where we're probably in an oversupply situation, and that's what happens with commodity production. The cure for low prices is low prices. The cure for high prices is high prices. You're kind of seeing that this year.
Yeah, and exports they're going higher. So it's not that we're not exporting as much. It's just simply, as you said, these yields are pretty incredible, and the fact that we have these really favorable weather conditions that we've seen this year. How are farmers adjusting to this reality?
Well, some are going to, unfortunately, put their head in the sand and say, oh, well, you know what, this will all be fine. It's just a blip. Some people like me here at the agricultural economics angle have pointed out, I just pulled something. I printed this off almost a year and a half ago. This is a stat from the United States Department of Agriculture, and it's from at the end of year 2022. The end of year 2022, China was our number one agricultural customer in 2022 with $36 billion of agricultural products bought from the United States. They're going to be about half that this year. So what we've got now is a very ascending productive capacity in soybeans, 86 million acres planted and harvested, whereas just 30, 40 years ago, we might have been in like 60 or 70 million. So we got a bunch more acres, growing a bunch more bushels per acre. And we did that. We were conditioned to that in agriculture to supply the new China, tiger, this whole thing about China over the last 20 years. Well, the problem is China's plenty supplied. Brazil ramped up production. Argentina ramped up production. Other Asian countries ramped up production as well as us. So we're in this situation. What are farmers doing to adapt? Well, they could switch acres to something else, but with 86 million acres planted, it tells me they didn't switch off of many acres. They could also figure out new ways to sell their product, and that's where the biodiesel is going to come into effect, although that's more government-driven than farmer-driven.
You were on a farm recently where they had said, forget about the soybeans. We're going to be grazing cattle on this land instead. Can you tell me about that? I saw that on your Twitter, and I knew I wanted to talk to you about soybeans because I was just super intrigued by what was happening there on the ground.
So think about this, Simone. Soybeans essentially were not really much of a crop until post-World War II in the United States. They were grown in Asia, 1,000 years ago, but they didn't really come into mass acreage, broad acre production here in the United States until really the 1950s. So we're going to have 86 million acres that's almost 1/4 of our total cropland acres in the United States. Just to put that in perspective, corn's about 90 million, soybeans are about 90 million. Those two commodities occupy about 1/2 of all cropland food producing acres, not counting rangeland and grassland. So the intriguing part of that episode, of that video that you saw, my friend Kelly Garrett in Iowa, large scale farmer, also has cattle as well as a cropland. And he ran the numbers with his consultant financial advisor on the farm. And he said, we've retooled what we think our cost of production is on these soybeans. And at $9 soybeans, which is where we're hovering right now, a little over $9 per bushel, we think we can make more money by putting a mix of cover crops and forage crops on these fields and putting cattle on them. And if you keep up right now, beef prices are still pretty high. The consumer's still paying for steaks and cheeseburgers. And so there's a little bit of a shortage of cattle. So he says, what if I took some of my acres out of soybean production and planted it to an array of forage crops and then turn the cattle in there, intensively grazing it? I mean, you're not talking about 1 cow per acre. You're talking about a bunch of cows per acre and moving them, maybe 2 times a day, moving them and really maximizing that. And it looks like that's going to work. Most people, Simone, wouldn't think that you could do that in Iowa. They would say, oh, soybeans in Iowa all day long, trump cattle. But, it looks like the cattle are going to make more money per acre on some of his fields than soybeans.
Well, it's certainly economic innovation on the farmer's part to make that type of dramatic transformation there. But to your point, a lot of other farmers are holding out hope. Do you think that this 4-year low in prices, do you think there will be a turnaround? Obviously, low prices cure low prices. We're going to see fewer acres of soybeans planted in the following crops, correct?
Most of the hope is hinged on this. I pulled up a couple of things in some agricultural media. This one right here is a big one. The United States Department of Agriculture announces $99.6 million, almost $100 million for biofuels and clean energy projects. You've heard about ethanol. Ethanol is in its 20th year now, generally derived from corn. We invented the renewable fuel standard under the George Bush administration 20 years ago. There are approximately 190 ethanol plants that use corn as their feedstuff to make as their supply to make ethanol. Ethanol then goes into your gas tank. About 10%, 11% of everything that you burn in your tank on average is ethanol derived from corn. Well, we're kind of looking at doing that with soy for soy diesel, biodiesel. We've had biodiesel products before. The new angle is to use the oil. If you crush a soybean, 80% of it ends up as soybean meal, which is best used to feed to a pig or a cow to make a pork chop or a steak. The 20% becomes oil. That oil would be required then to go straight into a refining process to make diesel. So there's a lot of hope for a cleaner diesel, a less emission, a less pollutive diesel derived from using soybean oil. Of course, then you're going to have a little bit of a glut of soybean meal, which makes a very cheap feed, which also might help bring down the cattle prices because that would go then to the beef. So I think that's the biggest hope right there. The idea that farmers are going to produce less. No farmer that you'll ever meet says, you know what I want to do next year? I want to decrease my yields by 10% by doing a crappy job. Most of them are saying, I want to go ahead and get more bushels per acre, and I want to be more efficient, and I want to be a star producer.
Yeah, but as these prices are so low right now, 45% down, like I said, from 2022 highs. And it's not just the soybeans. Corn prices are low too. Wheat prices are low as well. I talked about it a little bit off the top, but how does this kind of ripple out through the whole farm country? You were in Iowa. Iowa's struggling.
Yeah. And so this is an election year. So there's that angle. There's the political as well as the economic angle of it. But your answer, I guess the question you really want to know is, what can a farmer do to adjust? You can switch off acres. What has historically happened, and trust you, some of us are old enough to remember the 80s. You go to town and get a job, and you really have to buckle down on some of your finances. Are we there yet? Well, we're not covering 18% borrowed money interest rates, so we're not quite there yet, Simone. What we would do, we will switch some acres to some more specialty crops. There is a new chance at some increased revenue through sustainability programs. Companies like one of my sponsors, Truterra, that will pay you if you can do cover crops and reduce tillage. So maybe you break even on your soybeans, but you pick up $25 an acre off of a sustainability program, and that becomes your margin, which is paltry, I admit. But a break even or positive margin certainly keeps you in business longer than losing money per acre. But no, it's a tough situation right now, and it's a story that we've heard a lot in agriculture and in economics as it pertains to American agriculture. We're amazing at our productive capacity, and then we always have to look for somewhere to go with our bushels.
Damian Mason, host of the Business of Agriculture podcast. Thank you so much for your time, Damian.
Thanks for having me on, Simone.